All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're flipping back over into V-Ray, and we're going to spend some more time in our V-Ray objects, trying to figure out how materials apply to the object. So what makes the scale work? What makes the texture work on a particular material? And this is a broader topic called texture mapping. It's how we take the texture and apply it to the object. And it starts to be something that's really important to develop realistic looking objects. So we're going to spend our time today working on that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you guys are going to give me just a second to get organized. There we go. Perfect. And so I've gone ahead and I've pulled up our exercise 207. This is what we're working on today. In part one, we're going to create a bunch of shapes and then talk about how to apply textures to them. I'm going to use a texture that has a very obvious pattern. So brick or siding or something that repeats so that it's easy to see how we're applying this texture mapping. We're then going to assign texture mapping to all the objects. And then in part three, we're actually going to work on our bridge again and our glass wall again. And we'll bring them into a new model and create a rendering out of those. So I'll walk you through all of these, but we're going to start with that texture mapping part. So let me go ahead and minimize this right now, and we'll jump into Rhino. I have my remote desktop open. For those of you that have been working on your own computers, today is about V-Ray, so you're going to want to make sure that you're connected to the remote desktop unless you already have V-Ray on your computer. I do have all of my files saved in the OneDrive folder, so everything's ready for me. And we'll start by getting our Rhino world organized here a little bit. Let me close all the V-Ray toolbars except for the V-Ray all toolbar, and I'm going to drag that up to the top here and dock it for using later. So I'm going to start by creating a brand new file here. So we'll go to File and then New. I don't need to save changes to this one. And I'm going to use the large object inches template. And we'll go ahead and say Open. And there we are. And before I create my objects, I really need some basic settings to be able to do the renderings. So let's go ahead and make our current renderer V-Ray. So I'll go up to the Render menu, and I'll choose Current Renderer V-Ray for Rhino. There we go. And then over in our layers, I'm going to make a layer, take layer 1 here, and I'll make that Environment. Perfect. And then we'll create a sublayer for an infinite plane. And I'll go ahead and make that layer Current, and then click on the V-Ray Infinite Plane tool. Let's go ahead and switch this into shaded mode. So I've taken the perspective and I've switched it into shaded mode. And then we'll go back to the environment layer and I'll lock the infinite plane so I can't accidentally select it. Let's create another sublayer for lighting. It looks like it's a sub-sublayer. Let's get it out of being a sublayer. There we go. And I need a basic light setup here. So we'll do a box corner to corner. Like that. And let's go ahead and use our basic directional light. But I do want it to be on the light layer, so let me change that to be the current layer. And we'll go from, let me turn on my end, mid, and perpendicular snaps. And we'll go from the lower corner of this box up to the upper corner of that box, right like that. And that's creating a light for me. I can go ahead and delete this box after the fact. So I can press the Delete K or type delete into the command line, and that gets rid of that. So I have my light that's been established. I have my infinite plane. Again, both of those are things that I don't want to move. So I'll go ahead and lock both of those layers. And now I'm ready to get started. So let's go ahead and double click on the perspective layer to make it the large size. And we're going to create several different objects to work with today. The first one I want to create is kind of a long, skinny rectangle that looks like a wall. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to say, let's say at 1 foot, comma, 12 feet, enter. And we'll make that wall 8 feet tall. like that. And actually, I should be putting that on the default layer. So let me right click and say change object layer, and we'll make the default layer active again. So there's that first little object. Then let's go ahead and make a cube in front of it. So we'll come over here and we'll say, I don't know, at 4 feet, comma, 4 feet. And we'll make it 4 feet tall. So it's 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. And then let's make a sphere. So I'll come over here into the sphere. And let's make the radius, or excuse me, the diameter 4 feet. It's a little bit low, so let's move it vertically by 4 feet. So I typed move. Sorry, that should have been 2 feet. Vertical, going down 2 feet here. Nope. How about vertical, -6 feet? Nope, still can't get it right. Let's try it one more time. Move, V for vertical, 2 feet. That's what I wanted. So perfect. I have that sphere sitting on top of the ground plane, right like that. So I have a sphere. We also need a cylinder. So I'll choose cylinder here. We can make our cylinder with a radius of 2 feet and a height of 4 feet. See, I'm trying to keep these relatively consistent in size as we kind of work through this. And then the last one that I'll do is maybe like a pyramid. We could do a cone as well. So we'll do this pyramid like that. So like I said, today is fundamentally about how do we apply textures to an object. So to get started, I'm going to take all 4 of these objects in front, and I'm just going to hide them. So I type in hide, they go away. Remember, if I want to bring them back, I just type in show, and they'll come back. I'm going to select my wall here, type Z for zoom, followed by S for selected. That's going to orient my view around this one object. There we go. My screen had frozen there. And then let's go ahead and apply a material to it. So we're going to open up our V-Ray asset editor. There it is. And I'll open the drawer to the left, which is going to show me all of my default materials. And I'm going to pick a material that has a major pattern to it. Bricks is a great one to start with. So let's use this red brick material. And I'm going to apply this material directly to my selection. So it's directly on this object. Now that it's directly on this object, it would be nice to be able to see it. So let's switch our view from being in shaded mode to being in rendered mode. Now remember, the rendered mode is merely an approximation of what our object looks like. So it may or may not be entirely accurate. Sometimes it doesn't show up at all. So for right now, it is fairly accurate. But we can see that if this wall is 12 feet long and 8 feet high, we don't have a 6 foot long brick. These bricks are much, much smaller. So we need to adjust how the material is applied to this particular object. So we've applied the material. Now it's a matter of adjusting the material. So with the object selected, which it is right now, I'm going to come over into my palettes here, but I'm not going to work in layers. I'm instead going to work on properties. So I'll click that little colored wheel to work with the properties. And you see that our default properties are here, but next to our default, our object properties, is our material properties. So if I were to click on that, it would tell me that, there we go, we're using a V-Ray material. The name of the material is Bricks A02. And if I move over one more, I get to something called texture mapping. And that's fundamentally what today's going to be about. It's about this texture mapping. So I'm going to click on the texture mapping, and you see that I get a bunch of tools that are showing up here. Now, at the top, we have some basic shapes. And then we have, in the second row, a few other tools that we'll use. We'll use this match mapping. And then we have some other options to show our mapping widgets, etc. Below that, we have other information about this texture. And we'll get to that in just a little bit. So one of the best places to start when it comes to texture mapping is to identify what type of object you have. Frequently, you have an object that exists as a primitive object, a primitive shape. This object is very close to a block. So let's use our box tool and apply a box mapping. So over here in the texture mapping little window, we're going to go over to the apply box mapping tool. I'll go ahead and click on it. Let's look up in our command line. It says first corner of base, or you could just pick a bounding box. A bounding box is simply a box that goes all the way around our object. Let's use a bounding box. And I'll go ahead and do that. The coordinate system, do we want it to be in the world coordinates or in the C-plane? In this case, both of those options are identical, so we don't need to worry about it. I'm going to pick world coordinates.
What's the difference between them?
So we haven't really gotten to C-planes yet, but you can change the drawing plane, the plane that you're working in. From, like right now, it's in the XY plane. That's if I were to, by default, if I were to draw something, it would show up in XY on the ground. We can actually change that plane. It's kind of like UCS coordinates in AutoCAD, but we can change that to be a vertical plane, or we can change it to be any plane in space that we want it to be. And so we could, when we're creating this texture map, we could map to a particular drawing plane if we wanted to. That's not the XY standard plane. It's not very common to do it, but it is something that you can do if you needed it. Most of the time, we're going to stick with just world coordinates. Do we want this wall to be capped? Yes, we do. So I'm going to choose yes. And there we go. So it looks a little bit better on the surface. The bricks got a little bit smaller. But if we look at the side, well, all the bricks are kind of squished. Likewise, all the bricks are kind of squished on the top. So our texture map is better, but not quite right yet. So let's look at some of our options. Again, I have this selected. And if we come down here into our options, we'll see that, yes, our type is a box. And as we come down here, we have an X, Y, and Z position. These options just control where it is in space. We don't need to worry about that too much. The defaults are fine. But then we come down here to X, Y, Z size. And so right now, this size is at 12 inches, 144 inches, and 96 inches, which happen to correspond to our X, Y, and Z distances of our object, the length. So it's 12 feet long, that's 144 inches. So it is taking one image of texture and stretching it to fill 144 inches, 96 inches, and 12 inches. Well, that one image of texture really doesn't apply that way. So instead, we can equalize how it's applied. So we have three different options on the left here. This lowest one with the brackets says match the object. So that's what we have. We can instead move up into X equals Y equals Z, where they're going to take an average of these three values and apply that across the board, which is generally the closest to what we're after. So X equals Y equals Z will take the average of our values and apply that on all sides. And if we look at it, we can kind of see that the texture looks like it wraps around the corners now. Feels a lot better. This top option, the 1, 1, 1 option, will shrink it down so that it's 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, or excuse me, 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. And our whole texture will be applied as if it were 1 inch by 1 inch by 1 inch. So this is generally not a good option because it's way too small for what we're after. So I like to start with the X equals Y equals Z option. Let's go back here and let's go to X equals Y equals Z. And then I'll modify from there. So right now, right, we still have a texture that's rather large. Now we could change these values. So instead of picking the average, I could lock them, and then I could change this value. So if I went, the higher the number, the larger this texture is going to be. So if I wanted to go down a little bit, I could go to maybe 60, and the bricks are going to get smaller. I could go to 50, and the bricks would get a little bit smaller still. I could go to 20, and the bricks would get a lot smaller. So I can adjust these. So let's go back to about 60. The other way of adjusting this, that's the XYZ size. The other way of adjusting it is to adjust the number of times that our single image repeats across the object. So we can come down here into our UVW repeat, and right now we're repeating only once across the object. So that image is occurring once every 60 inches. If I change this number to be 2, it's going to repeat every 30 inches. If I change it to 6, it's going to replace every 10 inches. So it's another place where we can adjust the material. And it depends on what is more comfortable for you in terms of thinking about this material. I'm going to go back to 1, and then I tend to fine tune with this adjustment. So this might need to be a little bit smaller, maybe 1.2, somewhere like that. And yeah, those bricks seem about right. And that's really what it comes down to. We could get more precise. We could count if a brick is 4 inches tall, we could count how many courses there should be and make adjustments. But really, we're looking visually, does that feel about right? Okay, so I'm going to continue on with some other shapes, and then we'll return back to this shape a little bit later on. Because, for example, I don't like how the top is applied. But I want to go through some of the other objects before we come back and make that adjustment. So I'm going to go ahead and type show, and that's going to show my other objects. And I'm going to work on this box now. So I'll click the box. We'll go into my V-Ray materials, and we're going to pick a different texture. We could use the bricks again. Let's go ahead and use a different brick. Why not? Let's use this brick. I'll right click and say apply to selection. And I don't know why it gave me the same bricks, but we'll just go with it. There it is. Now this is 4 feet by 4 feet by 4 feet. So it's a different layout. So it doesn't look quite as bad. It's a little stretched, but we still want to apply a new texture map to it. So with it selected, we'll choose the box mapping. Again, we'll come up here and say, let's use a bounding box. We use world. And now we have, capped, yes. And now we have our texture applied. That one's actually pretty close because it's already a square. So we're using the image that we have one time on each surface. Also, because it's a square, our XYZ size is set at 48, 48, 48. Our UVW repeat is set at 1s. If we wanted to change the scale, we could adjust the UVW repeat, for example, to be, 1.2 or 1.4, and we get different numbers of bricks. So that was pretty easy. So what happens if we want to change the orientation? So right now, our bricks come up, they wrap around here, but then our top bricks are going this way. What if we wanted our top bricks to go this way? So if we want to do that, we can actually modify the whole material after the fact using something called the show mapping widget. So over here in our properties and our texture mapping, we're going to click on this show mapping widget. When we do that, we get this yellow dotted object. I can move and manipulate that yellow dotted object and control how the materials are applied. So I could take that yellow dotted object, it's currently selected. I could choose rotate. Oops, sorry, I have to be in here. Rotate. And I could rotate that object. And as I rotate this object, you'll see that the textures apply differently. Right, so let me swing it all the way to 90 degrees. And now that top is in line here. Alternatively, we can use something called the gumball. And this is the one place where I find the gumball useful. Some people love it and they want to use it all the time. For me, most of the time it's annoying, but in the case of texture mapping, I really enjoy using it. So down here at the very bottom of my screen, there's a button for gumball. And I can turn that button on, gumball. And what we end up with is this fancy dancy little cursor. Okay, so we have the center of the object, then we have a blue, a green, and a red axis. And we can actually rotate these on any one of those axes. right? So you can see how I'm creating that rotation. If I hold down Shift, it will jump to 90 degrees, and I could start to rotate my object like that. I could rotate the object at 45, and then I could rotate it up so that the sides were at 45. That. And again, these are still wrapping around the object. So I'm really customizing how that is being applied. So let's go back. And I know that doesn't look at all realistic. Oh, by the way, to make that mapping widget go away, we need to select our object and then come up here and choose hide mapping. And that mapping will go away. Let's go back to our wall here. Let's go back to show mapping. And there's that box that's representing our mapping. So once again, if I wanted to rotate the texture on top, I can click on that blue. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I can get it to jump to the next. And now my texture is applying. Notice, however, that the top of the wall is still kind of having an issue. I can use the up and down arrow to change where the brick is applying to the wall. See how I can raise it up and raise it down?
But can you move it aside? Because I think it needs to be more right.
Absolutely. So I've moved it up and down. I could use this red to move it side to side. I could use the green to move it forwards and backwards until I found a place where I was comfortable with how the texture mapping was applied. So maybe I want there to be kind of a grout edge at the top. So the point is that once you have the mapping and you show it, you have complete control over how it's being applied. So you can control where the seams occur. You can control where in space. You can change the rotation. So I could change, any one of these rotations if I wanted to.
But can you do it apart, only the front?
So because of how these are applied, they're working together. If I wanted to change the top independently of the sides, let me come back to this object here. I would actually need to break this object apart. So instead of using it as a whole object, I would need to explode it and then select only the top, show the mapping for the top, and then make an adjustment just for the top. See how that's moving independently? So because that object was whole, because it was all connected together, the texture is applying to the whole object. If it was an individual surface, then I can apply the texture mapping just to that surface.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's continue on. So we've got those first two. Let me go ahead and hide the mapping widgets. So we'll go ahead and select it, and we'll hide the mapping widgets. Let me take this wall. We'll hide the mapping widgets. There we go. So they go away. And then let's work with the sphere. And actually, for the sake of arguments here, let's make some of these go away. Okay, let's work on just the sphere. I'm going to zoom selected. And when I apply the material to this, let's go into my asset editor here. And once again, I'll apply the bricks to it. Right click and say apply to selection. Oh, how nice. It didn't. So this does have a tendency to happen sometimes. Let me try a different. Let's go into stone. Apply to selection and see if it's going to show. There we go. Not sure why the brick didn't want to show, but there it is. And so I've applied the stone to this shape. Now, notice that it gets really pinched up here at the top. So this is something that we have to work with as we work on our texture mapping. So this is not like a box. So we wouldn't want to pick the box mapping, but right next to it is a spherical mapping. So let's go ahead and pick that. We'll again choose our bounding box, which is the default. And we'll use world as our coordinates. And lo and behold, not a whole lot changed. And that's because the original mapping was guessing that since it was a sphere, we probably wanted a sphere. But now that we've created this, we again have our opportunity to change things like our UVW repeat sizes. So maybe in this case, we want the texture to be bigger. We could do 0.75. The texture would get a little bit bigger. We could, oh, sorry. we should lock no, it doesn't want to do it for me. Let me get them all together here. 1, 1. So we're back. I should have locked them before I changed it. 0.75. We'll make that texture a little bit bigger, etc. Looks like there's some issues with the seam here too. So what I can do though is I can once again show that mapping and then make some modifications. So I can hide the seam in the back. So I'll spin that around. Maybe I want it to be on axis, so I could spin the rock that way. I could spin it back this way a little bit, etc. So because of the nature of the sphere, when you're applying a material like this, there's always going to be some pinching at the top. Spheres work much better in materials that don't require texture mapping. So we could switch over into, say, a metal. And oh, it's so annoying that some of these aren't turning out. Let me go ahead and render it and see if it shows up. Nope, it's not taking. Oh, that's because I don't have the object selected. I have the map selected. That was the problem. Let me right click and say apply to selection. There we go. And now if I were to render it, we wouldn't get that weird pinch point because we're no longer pinching the object. So it works better in that kind of a texture. But maybe you want to have bricks on an object like that, in which case they're going to have some distortion when you come to the top. Let me go ahead and show the rest of my objects. There we go. And we'll move on to the cylinder. So once again, with the cylinder, we want to apply a new material to it. So let's go to let's do concrete this time. And let's pick this one. I'm going to right click and say apply to selection. There we are. And now we have concrete applied. It's going around our object and it's also going on top of our object. So this, if we look over at our texture mapping, most corresponds to a cylindrical mapping. So let's go ahead and apply the cylindrical mapping to it. And we'll again use our bounding box to set it up. We use our world coordinates, and there we are. And then we can play around with our sizes here. So we have 2 by 2 by 2. We can change the repeat. We can make it smaller. So let's do it at maybe 4. And we should see a lot more of those. And it did a convenient job of not updating for me. Love it when it does that. Yep, it's decided it doesn't want to update. So sometimes you do have to actually just render them. Oh, and we're way too bright. So let me come back to my V-Ray options. I go to my settings, and go to my camera, and I'm going to change my exposure value right here to 14. We'll stop the current render and we'll render again. And yes, this time we're seeing more repetition of these pieces, unlike my previewed object. How nice and how convenient. So this does happen sometimes. We have some options to work around it. I'll show you those, though I really like it when V-Ray or when Rhino decides to preview it. Makes life a little bit easier. First off, let's try switching into shaded mode and then switching back into rendered mode and seeing if it updates. Nope, didn't update. So what we can do instead is we can actually switch to something called V-Ray Interactive. It's down at the very bottom. And this will do a live preview of an actual V-Ray rendering. So it'll render out for us as we make changes. So if I wanted to adjust this texture mapping, again, I just select the object and I can say, yeah, you know what? I wanted it to be more like 3.0. And it'll change live and then re-render. So it's more taxing on the computer, but it is something that you can, make adjustments on the fly and see how they play out. Same thing applies where we can show the mapping of our object. Try it again. Let me show the mapping. And It's not going to show in the V-Ray Interactive, so let's go back to the rendered option. Why is it not showing up at all? How convenient. Let's try that cylindrical map one more time. There it is. Don't know why it wasn't showing up. But I can adjust that rotation and decide what face I want showing. We can go back and adjust size. Maybe this time it'll let me do it. Yeah, that time it's going to let me do it. So it was just a problem in the previews. Okay, so that's our cylindrical map. Next one we come to is our pyramid. And so this is a fundamentally much harder object to map. So let me go ahead and assign a material to it. Let's use that concrete again. I'll right click and say apply to selection. There it is. And so now we have to sort out, how do we want to apply this material? Well, it doesn't fall into any of our normal categories. So we have to think kind of through what's our best option. So this surface mapping is going to basically apply the material to each surface, but they're not going to be continuous across. If we used a box mapping, we'd end up with funny, let's see if I can get it to do it. It's not bad, but we end up with some funny distortions in certain places. And of course, I can't seem to see where that distortion is occurring. It should be on one of the edges. This actually is turning out shockingly not bad. Normally, I get weird distortions on it, but it's probably because the orientation is working. I'm really trying to find it. Anyway, so in that scenario, maybe this isn't a bad choice. And using that as our mapping. Alternatively, we could try one of the other ones. We could try a cylindrical map. So we could come over here and try the cylindrical map. And again, we'll just use the bounding box. And go like that. And that one's not bad because we're concerned with the horizontal. Now, if I were to show the mapping and then make some rotations on it, let's say we wanted that to go on the side like that, we'd end up with some weird distortions. So I could continue, I could move this down and try to hide it, but you see that we're just struggling as we come around to get everything to line up. See, there's an issue there. We're going kind of opposite directions. So one of our options, I'm going to undo this. And again, this is definitely a much more advanced strategy. Let me delete the current mapping. And that is that we can use one of these unwrap maps. So what unwrap does is it says select the seam. So you can think about where do you want the seam to be. So inherently, if we were to fold this flat, excuse me, we'd have to have a seam on one of these, but the rest of these could all fold together. But we'd also have to have some seams on the bottom. So we'd have to pick our way around the object like that to create another set of seams. Once we've done that, we can hit enter. And it's now going to map it using that back corner as a seam, but the texture should go and wrap around our object. So we can increase the UVW repeat here. So maybe go to 4. And you can start to see how it's wrapping across my object this time, except for where I created that seam. So as long as we can hide that, we can see the material working our way around the object. Again, if you didn't like it, you could keep upping this value. Let's go up to maybe 10. And now you're seeing it like that, where you get a little bit more of the stripe pattern. So you can do it that way, where you think about how you might want to unwrap the object and unfold it. That's a perfectly reasonable way of setting it up. But we can get into far more detail. The truth is that mostly the standard objects and the standard mapping are really all that you need. So match it up with the shape that you're creating, and you should be pretty good to go. So when I'm all done with this, I'm going to do a render as proof. So let's go ahead and click on my little teapot icon to do a final render of it. Perfect. And when it's done, I'm going to go ahead and save the file. I'm going to change it to a JPEG, and then I'll save it on my flash drive. I don't need to actually save it, but you guys get the idea. So now let's look at the objects that we created in the last two exercises. So I'm going to go to File and then Open. And again, I'm not, well, I should save this. Let me save this. And we'll go ahead and click Save. And then let's open up our file from last class. So let me go into 205. Actually, I'm going 2 days ago. And we're going to open up my file, which of course I didn't save. Let's go ahead and I'll just use a sample one here. All right. So I have this. Let's switch it back into our shaded mode so we can just see the geometry. And this is the file that I will use. Now, for you guys, you already did a quick rendering of it, so you probably have an infinite plane underneath. So you have that layer underneath here that would have environment. And then you had a sublayer for infinite plane. Like that, you guys get the idea. Now, we don't need the light or the infinite plane later on. We just want the object. So what I want you to do is I want you to clean up your file by clicking on the environment layer, right-clicking on it and saying delete layer. Yes, let's delete it. It has sub-objects. Do we want to delete those too? Yes, we do. So we'll say yes to all, and everything goes away. Then we want to take our object itself and clean up the layers for that. So I have just one object, or excuse me, just one thing that I care about, and I'm going to put it on a layer called bridge. So I created the layer, I right-clicked on it and said change object layer, and that leaves me with just the bridge. And you'll see where I'm going with this in a little bit, but the idea is that we'll be able to reuse this object over and over again. I've also taken the liberty of moving this object so that this corner right here corresponds to 0, 0, 0. So I'd go to move, I'd pick that corner, I'll say 0, 0, 0. It will help when we bring it into another file. So let's make sure our materials have been applied and we like our texture mapping. So let's go into our V-Ray asset editor here. I'm going to work with concrete. Let's go ahead and use that concrete simple. I'm going to apply to the selection. And then let's look at it. So I'll click here and I'll go into rendered mode to take a look at what it looks like. This way I can kind of see my texture mapping. And remember that this is roughly a square. So let's use that to our advantage. Let's go to properties. Let's go to our texture mapping and let's apply a box map to this. So we use our bounding box. That looks good. And let's cap it. Yes, perfect. So now we have that applied. And we can kind of look at our object. We can say, do we like what it looks like? Is the texture too big? Yeah, in this case, I think it is. So let me select everything. Again, I'm selecting everything as I'm working with it. And let's do an x equals y equals z to even out the texture. And let's change the UVW repeat to maybe 2, maybe 3. Just trying to shrink that down a little bit. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. If I don't like, right, how this is matching up, remember, I can select it all. I can go into my show mapping, and I could adjust where that's being applied. So I can say, yeah, I like that a little bit better there. If I don't like the tops, the way that they're showing, remember, I can rotate those. Let me hold down Shift so it jumps to 90. And then I can move those side to side until I get the top the way I want to see it. Like that. So I'm just tweaking. I'm using those that mapping widget to show to adjust my texture mapping. Let me select it all again. I'll go back to my texture mapping, and I'm going to hide the mapping widget. And now I'm back and left with just this piece. Let's go ahead and save it. I'll go to File and then Save. And I'm going to put it into today's folder. Actually, I should probably do a Save As. Let me go to File and then Save As. And we'll put it into today's folder. And here we are. And I'm going to call this one Bridge. And we'll click Save. So I've got that one set. Let's go ahead and open up that glass spider from last class. Let me go to File and then Open. And I'm going to go into our folder from last class. There's my curtain wall. And I'm going to do the same thing now. I'm going to clean up this file. I'm going to go over to my layers. I'm going to get rid of the environment layer. We'll get rid of all that. And I already have a spider clamp layer and I have a glass layer, but I don't need layer 2, 4, or 5. So I'll select layer 2, click the little X to get rid of it. I'll click the little X there, and I'll click this little X here. So I'm really trying to pare it down so that I only have my materials left. Now, for the glass, we don't need to worry about texture mapping because glass is glass. Furthermore, for the metal, we don't really need to worry about texture mapping there either. So in both of these cases, the texture mapping is rather limited. So at this point, I can go ahead and do a Save As of this file. So I'll go to File and then Save As. And we're going to put it into my folder for today. And it's going to be called Curtain Wall. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. So the next part is that we're going to bring these objects into a brand new file and then use that file to do a final rendering. So let me go ahead and go to File and then New. And we can do a large object inches template and start building our file. The good news for you is that I went ahead and I created a file for you. If you come all the way down here, that is a base file for test rendering with sky or with a white background. Let's go ahead and download the one with sky. Then we'll get some better reflections. So I will right click on this and I will say, and again, this is on my Mac, so I apologize. We want to download the linked file as. Yours will say, if it's in Chrome, save linked file as. And we're going to choose where we want it to go. I'm going to put it into my OneDrive so that it ends up over. Where'd my OneDrive go? There it is. No, it isn't. Huh, is it not syncing? No, it is. Weird. Where it is, OneDrive. It's right in front of me. Sorry. I'm going to put it into my folder for today. So again, this was on my computer. That's why I have to go through this extra effort. Let's go to 207. There's our folder for today. I'm going to go ahead and save this base file for test rendering. And again, that's designed to help you out. So that's why I'm giving it to you. And I'm going to use the one with the sky in it. Okay, so it should have just uploaded for me, which means that it should be over here. So I can go to File and then Open. And I can open that base file for test rendering. There it is. And so the difference here is that I already have an environment. I already have a light installed so that all we need to do is bring our pieces in. So this is the first opportunity that we have to bring in what's called a block reference. And we will use block references a lot in this class because you'll work on a particular piece and then you'll bring it into another scene to perform a rendering. And so it's something that we'll get used to, but I introduced this concept early and we'll use it often. So I need to insert those files first. So I'm going to go to Edit and then Blocks and then Insert Block Instance. This is going to let me choose that file. So let me click this little folder icon. And I'm going to go into my OneDrive, into my folder for today. There it is. And I'm going to bring in the bridge first. We'll go ahead and say Open. Now, we have some options as we bring it in. Notice that we have an embedded that basically is copying and pasting the file and sticking it in. But one of the options that we have is something called linked. And as long as we maintain our original file and it exists in the same place, we're better off using linked because we can update the original file and make changes later on. So I'm going to do linked. And then down here under layer style, I choose reference because it eliminates a lot of confusion. So we're going to do linked and reference, and we'll say OK, and then we'll say OK here. Now you see that my bridge shows up in this file. Now it's different than before. Let me turn off the gumball. There we go. It's different than before because remember, this was made up of lots of pieces. When it comes in as a block, all those pieces are kind of grouped together. So let's go ahead and move it up vertically. So I'll type move followed by enter, choose vertical. And I don't know, let's go up maybe 10 feet. There it is. Now I'd like to have some more of these. So I can just copy and paste them. Let me go to transform and then copy. And I can make a copy and snap it there. Make a copy. Snap it there. Come on. Snap it there, etc. So you guys are getting the idea, right? So I can just keep going and I can make a bridge out of all those little pieces. Once I had a big group, I could select all of these and I could copy them again. Copy from there to right there, and now my bridge gets even longer. Like that. So these are all referencing that original file, and I'm using those over and over again. Let's bring in the glass curtain wall. We're again going to go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. This time I don't want the bridge, I want instead the curtain wall. Go ahead and say OK. Again, it's going to be linked as a reference. We'll say OK. We'll say again. And there's my first little glass curtain wall. It's oriented the wrong direction, so I do need to make a rotation of it. So I'm going to go to transform and then regular rotate. And we're going to take it from here and put it there. I want to step back for a second and make sure that my curtain wall is fairly close to my bridge. So let's go ahead and move this kind of over to right about there. And actually, we may find that we want it a little bit further back, maybe like right about there. Now, in order to kind of build up this curtain wall, I can copy and paste it just like I did the bridge, but I could save a lot of time using the array command. So to access the array command, I'm going to type array and then enter. And it's going to say select the object to array. That'll be my curtain wall here. I'll hit enter. Then it says number in the X direction. Well, I only want 1 in the X direction, so we'll leave it at 1. Number in the Y direction. That's how many do I want going this way? I don't know, 30, followed by enter. Number in the Z direction. How many going up do I want? Let's try 6. Enter. Then it's going to ask for the spacing, the Y spacing. So the Y spacing is basically the glass. So if I were to click on this corner of the glass and click on that corner of the glass, you'll see that I'm now getting a bunch in this row. Let me do it for the Z spacing. It's going to be the vertical glass. So we'll go again from that point right there, and we'll go up in that direction to right there. And now in this pink, it kind of gives us a preview of what it looks like. So we've just built a huge wall out of one piece because of how we created the geometry originally. That's a great strategy. Let's go ahead and commit to it, and I'll hit enter. If I didn't like it, if I wanted to change the number, so for example, the Z number, if I wanted 5, I could change and cut one row off. If I wanted more, I could change from 30 to 32, and I get 2 more on the end. So you can make those adjustments after you've created it. Then I'll go ahead and hit enter to finish. And now I have that curtain wall of all of those pieces. Let me zoom in so that I'm getting the curtain wall behind my little bridge here. Maybe about like that. And then it's time to do a render. So I have this, I like it. Now we can go ahead and do that render. I should be able to just click the render icon and it should turn out okay because I gave you this as a sample file. Yep. And so now we're getting the bridge in the foreground and we're getting all the glass in the background. And I know there's no ground and there's no building context and whatever, but you can see how this is starting to come together. So we built these two components, these two pieces, and then we can use those pieces later on in a repetitive manner. Now, one of the best things about this is you can say, you know what? I don't like this bridge. I don't like the texture map. I don't like the material. So what I can do is I can save this file. Let me do a save as. And we'll call this exercise 2.0, what are we on? 7 base render. I'll click save. And then I can go back and I can open the bridge and make changes to it. So I'm actually going to open Rhino again so that I can leave this open. I'm going to double click on the Rhino file or on Rhino here. And then I'm going to open back up that bridge that I was working on. All right, let's go ahead and continue. Okay, so there's the bridge that I was working on. And let's say, you know what, I really didn't like the concrete that was applied to it. So let me select it. I'll go back to my V-Ray asset editor. I'll open out to the left here and I'll choose concrete. And I'll say, you know what, I'm going to use just a simple concrete here. I'm going to right click and say apply to selection. I've now updated my concrete. You see it has a different texture, different pattern on it. And this looks pretty good. I can save it now. I'll go to File and then Save. Okay, so it saves. Then when I go back to my file where I was doing the rendering, I can go into Edit and then Blocks, Block Manager, and you'll see that the bridge says the linked file is newer. I can then choose Update, and it will update the bridge with the new material such that I could re-render it, and instead of that material, it would switch over to the new material that I picked. So I can make that change after the fact. Furthermore, I could say, you know what? I don't like the geometry of this anymore. Let me go back to that bridge again, and let's say I want to add some wood on top, a railing, right? I could come in here. Oops. Sorry, picked the wrong one. Oh, come on. Fine, I'll minimize you. Okay, so I can come back in here and I could say, okay, let's add a wooden railing on top. So let me go from here to here. And let's say this should be, I don't know, 3.5 inches. Let me scale this. I'm going to do a scale 1D, and I'm going to change the width to be 0.75, so that gets a little bit smaller. That is a little bit of wood. Let's move this vertically up, I don't know, 4 inches. And let's create a little piece that comes down and tucks on there. Let me scale this. Again, scale 1D. And let's do that at 1.5 inches. It's just a little post. I have no idea. I'm just making this up. And let's put some wood on these two pieces. So I'll select those two pieces. I'll go into my V-Ray. Let's go to wood. And let's pick a piece of wood. I don't know. Let's do this one. I'll right click and say apply to selection. There we go. I should spend a little bit of time texture mapping, so I want to look at this. I'm going to texture map the top piece first, so I'll pick this one. I'll go into my properties. I'll go into my texture mapping. This looks like a box, so we use the box. Bounding box, world, yes. And then I'm going to equalize it. So I'll do x equals y equals z. But I want to control the grain. I don't want it going vertically here. So here's my opportunity to show my mapping widget. There it is. Let's use my gumball. And let's rotate it so that my wood grain is going along the direction of it. It's good. I'm pretty happy about that. Now, this piece, oh, I should make that mapping widget go away. This piece, I'd like to have the same kind of general grain texture as this, but it's going in the opposite direction. So what I can do is I can actually take this piece and choose match mapping. It's that little brush, and I can copy the mapping from this piece to this piece. There it is. And look, it's actually seamless as it comes down. But I want that to be rotated to the side. So I can go back to my show. Yep, go ahead.
Where's the match?
Okay, so the match, let me get rid of it for a second. I select the object, I come over into my texture mapping, and I choose the little broom icon.
Ah.
And when I click on that, it'll say select source object. There it is. So I've just copied the mapping, and now I can edit it. I can go in and show the mapping for that. I could rotate this piece sideways so that now the grain is going up and down here and going across there. So these are little details, but it does help. Let me hide the mapping widget, and there we are. Okay, so I have those two pieces done. I'm happy with it. I'll go to File and then Save. And then I can jump back to this bridge. And again, go up into the Edit, Blocks, Block Manager, and say, you know what? This bridge, I want to update that. Okay. And now that wood rail goes all the way along. If I wanted it to be on the other side, I could come back and I could take this wooden rail. We could copy it or mirror it better, so that it was on this side over here. Oops. It would help if I did it correctly. Let's try that one more time. There it is. Then I could save it again, File, Save. Come back to this piece, Edit, Blocks, Block Manager, Update. So this ends up being a really powerful tool because we can get approximate geometry, bring it into a main scene for rendering, and then make changes to it after the fact. So you saw I just added that railing, but it's applying to every one of the block references that I have. So I'm only making the change once, and it's populating across many more pieces. So we could do another little rendering here. And now we're going to see that wooden rail as it goes along. Okay, so I know it's a lot to take in today because we're dealing with texture mapping and then we're trying to bring these in as a block reference. But I think you can handle both in about 2 hours worth of time. Ultimately, the thing that I care about seeing when you turn it in on canvas is this render, where you have the bridge and you have the curtain wall behind. If you want to give me the other pieces, that's fine. This should take you about 2 hours. If you feel like you've put in a solid 2 hours and you're not there yet, turn in what you have, and I'll give you credit for it. Don't forget, this week we do have our mandatory check-ins. So if you didn't come on Monday, stick around today, and we'll start up a check-in in a little bit, or come back a little bit later today, and we can go over things. So I want to take a quick break, get some more caffeine. Let me just double check here really quick on our timing. I always lose track of these times. Our first check-in should start, well, it's supposed to start in 4 minutes. Let's give us a 10-minute break. Let's start at 12:26 for that first check-in. It gives everybody a second to grab some food or whatever, and then we'll get going. All right?
Professor?
Sure.
I had a question about the check-ins because I haven't been able to go to the last, all of them, because I have a class like right after this.
Sure.
So I'm wondering like what I should do about that because my class goes from 12:45 to 3:15. Okay.
Could you come between 10:20 and 10:50 in the morning, or do you have another class there?
10:20 and 10:50. No, I could do that.
Okay, so that's for my other class. It's the last session of my other class. But what I found this semester is that a lot of times the last sessions aren't full because people go to the first sessions and the check-ins. So if you could come to that either on Monday or Wednesday, I'll get you checked off that way. Likewise, I have some people from my first class who are coming to the last session of this class. So we'll just do some crossover.
Okay. Yeah, that works for me. Thank
Okay,
you.
so let's have you come then.
All right. Appreciate it.
Perfect. I'll see you all in whatever, 10 minutes or so.